I am a huge fan of crime. Larceny? Love it. Theft? Terrific. Robbery? Radical. Murder? Unbelievable. Absolutely love it. I went through a huge Scorsese phase. I think we all do at some point. I also went through a huge Law and Order phase back when it was just a deliberately paced police procedural that felt ripped from the headlines and not an action movie. I also love a good murder podcast, like anybody else. Comics are also no stranger to crime, though. Brubaker and Phillips have carried that torch very well, but if you're a fan of Criminal and Incognito, you should absolutely be reading Chip Zdarsky and Jacob Phillips Newburn. I'm about to tell you why. I'm Dan Umpton, and this is the Doomcast. Alright, first things first, do me a favor, hit subscribe and the bell. I make about one of these videos a week. They are all great, so please don't miss even one. I've never made a secret of my love for Chip Zdarsky, but I've never made secret love to Chip Zdarsky. But I am enjoying his Batman, loved his Daredevil, and Spider-Man work. But his creator-owned work is second to none. A writer and illustrator that is incredibly talented on both fronts. He has a knack for working with some of the best in the industry. Jacob Phillips is no exception at all. He may not be as well known, but the talent is absolutely worthy of the accolade as well. Easton Newburn is a man who lives in liminal space. That space is at the very edge of danger. We're introduced to a former cop who acts as a private detective for the 6 families of crime in New York. Untouchable, incorruptible Newburn acts as both detective, arbitrator, and partially as a judge for those families. A man in his late 50s, early 60s, he's austere, driven, intense in a way that Batman is, but also terrifying in a way that he isn't. He's out in the open. He has no secret identity. And while he's incredibly fit, a capable fighter, he's also not nearly as invulnerable as Batman is in a lot of ways. And in this series, it sees him taking a lot more than his fair share of damage and dealing with it in a very realistic way. He describes himself as a UN inspector, and the UN in this case is a place known as the Black Castle, a property of a former crime boss, used now as neutral territory for the heads of crime families to meet and hold conference specifically with Newburn, in this case, as well as an ersatz court to carry out sentence on people who violate the family's agreed upon terms. Basically, Newburn is now the only cop that the mob has that isn't dirty, and maybe because of that, he's the only real cop in the city, in duty, if not in actual name. In the first issue, Newburn is investigating the death of Carmine Albano, a black sheep of the Albano crime family, murdered over a coke deal gone wrong. One of the witnesses is a woman that calls herself Carla, but is actually Emily. Well, actually, living as Emily, who helped arrange the entire deal to get away with stealing the coke from Albano in the first place. When Newburn puts this together, he hires Emily as his assistant. Newburn is getting close to where he hopes to retire. He found a capable and worthy successor in Emily, who is a former police candidate. Emily, whose name isn't even Emily. Emily is actually Angie Walker, and washed out of the police force, changed her name, and went into hiding after a major incident while still a cadet. A decision over 8 years ago which had a major, massive repercussion on not just her life, but Newburn's also, and also on New York's crime families, and the tenuous and delicate balance that they held. Both her and Newburn lived surprisingly similar lives. Top students, incredible promise, involved parents that were dedicated to both of them. And at one point, both are faced with the incredible consequences of their actions to help other people. In case you can't tell, I am trying really hard to avoid spoilers for this series while still making this sound interesting. But of anything in my current poll, when this drops, it's my first read, bar none. Phillips' watercolor effect gives this noir detective thriller a very specific look and aesthetic that feels reminiscent of Sean Phillips' work without being derivative of it at all. Phillips' subtle use of expression for characterization adds a lot to Zdarsky's uncharacteristically serious and sometimes harrowing story. They both created a character and crime world that seems incredibly believable, yet deviously connected and complex. As the story unfolds, the web of connections between Newburn, Emily, and the crime families and several of the victims that they investigated, and even Newburn and Emily's own families are fascinating and gripping and sometimes terrifying. I cannot possibly recommend this book more highly. I hope you've been picking it up, but if you haven't, go pick it up in trade and continue enjoying it with me. Thanks for watching. This has been the Doomcast. We'll see you again next week.